Hi, I'm Maris. I wasn't supposed to be home that day. My flight got canceled, so I drove back, tired, ready for quiet. But instead, I found my own mother and brother breaking into my house. A moving truck sat outside, already packed with my things, my memories, my life. They froze when they saw me, like ghosts caught in daylight. Mom said it was a misunderstanding. My brother said it was temporary. But all I could see was the truth I'd ignored for years. They were never protecting me. They were taking from me. And the worst part? They almost got away with it. Before we dive in, tell me, what time are you listening and where from? Because this story, it could happen to anyone who trusted too long, stayed too quiet, or believed that family meant safety. Mine didn't. And the day I came back, everything changed. The airport terminal smelled like wet carpet and bad coffee when they announced my flight was canceled. Due to severe weather in Seattle, the agent said, her voice as flat as the gray sky outside. I stared at my phone, then at the clock. I could wait 2 days for the next flight or drive home tonight. I chose the road. Fate has a funny sense of timing. I told myself that as I signed the car rental papers. Maybe I was meant to drive. Maybe I was meant to see something. The drive south was quiet. The late fall sun sank behind the vineyards, leaving streaks of rust and gold across the sky. By the time I turned into my neighborhood in Santa Rosa, dusk had already swallowed most of the light. My street was still, the kind of still that used to comfort me. But that night, something felt off. There was a moving truck parked in front of my house, a big white one, engine running, back doors open. I slowed down, squinting through the windshield. The porch light was on. For a second, I thought maybe a neighbor was moving. Then I saw my sofa, my own beige sofa, being carried out by 2 strangers. My first reaction wasn't anger, it was disbelief. I parked and sat still, my hands locked around the steering wheel. Maybe there was some mistake. Maybe they were staging a movie scene. Then I saw my brother Gareth on the porch, fumbling with the lock, and my mother standing beside him, clipboard in hand, like she was directing a play. I got out of the car slowly, gravel crunching under my shoes. Neither of them looked up. Gareth was muttering something about getting this done before dark. I didn't speak. I just watched, my pulse loud in my ears. I wanted to see how far they would go before they noticed me. It took a moment. Then Gareth froze, mid-turn, his hand still on the doorknob, his face drained of color. You weren't supposed to be back for 2 weeks. My mother, Corinne, smiled that tight, sugar-coated smile she always used when she'd done something wrong but wanted to look righteous. "Sweetheart," she said, stepping forward, "we were just helping you. Start fresh. You've been so stressed lately. We thought a clean slate might help." My voice came out lower than I expected. A clean slate? Her smile trembled. "Well, yes. You mentioned moving, remember? We thought we'd take care of the hard part for you." I pulled my house key from my purse. The metal felt cold in my hand. When I slid it into the lock, it didn't turn. They had changed it. That was the moment something inside me went quiet. Not broken, quiet, like a candle snuffed out. I looked at Gareth, who couldn't meet my eyes, then at my mother, who was still trying to look calm. "Why don't you go inside?" she said softly, gesturing like a hostess. "You'll see we've done some organizing." I walked past her. The air inside was thick with dust and detergent. Boxes lined the hallway, labeled in my brother's handwriting, donation, garage sale, junk. My living room was stripped bare. The framed photos from the mantel, gone. The clock my dad gave me, missing. The wall where I'd hung my father's old fishing rod was empty. My chest tightened. I turned slowly toward them. "Did you pack my things too?" Gareth looked like a kid caught stealing. My mother answered for him. "We didn't think you'd mind. Most of it's old, darling. Old. That word hit harder than I expected. Old like useless. Old like me. The sound of my heartbeat filled the silence. Tick, tick, like a metronome marking time in a life I no longer recognized. I glanced around the house. The walls seemed smaller, the air thinner. Every trace of me was being erased under the name of love. When I was a kid, my mother used to tidy up my life, too. She'd throw out drawings she said were messy, rewrite my essays to help me get better grades. She called it caring. I called it control. Standing there, surrounded by cardboard boxes and ghosts, I realized nothing had changed. "I think you both should leave," I said finally. "Maris, don't be dramatic," my mother sighed. "You'll thank us once you settle somewhere new." "Somewhere new," I repeated. "You mean out of my house?" She frowned. "Well, technically." I didn't let her finish. I turned, walked outside, and felt the cool evening air sting my face. The truck engines still idled, exhaust curling like smoke signals into the darkening sky. "Maris, wait," Gareth called, jogging after me. "We were just trying to—" "Save me the speech," I said. My voice was calm, but my hands were shaking. I looked at the truck driver, then back at the house. My life, boxed, priced, and labeled. I pulled out my phone. "Hello, officer," I said, my tone even. "I'd like to report an unauthorized entry. My name is Maris Ellery. Yes, it's my home." Behind me, my mother gasped. "You wouldn't dare!" I met her eyes. "You were right, Mom. I wouldn't." I paused, the air stretching thin between us. "But today, I do." Gareth took a step, back, like the words had weight. The truck driver turned off the engine. The street fell silent, except for the faint hum of my own breath. In the distance, a siren began to wail, slow at first, then louder. My mother's lips parted, but she didn't speak. Gareth's shoulders slumped. I looked at the moving truck, at the pieces of my life stacked like garbage, and felt something strange, a sense of clarity, sharp and cold as glass. Maybe the flight wasn't canceled. Maybe the universe grounded me for this, or maybe it just stopped covering for the people I kept making excuses for. The red and blue lights danced across the driveway, strobing against the neighbor's garage doors like a slow, silent alarm that the whole block could feel. I stood with my arms crossed, my breath steady but cold in my chest. My mother sat on the porch steps, handkerchief in hand, dabbing invisible tears like a performance she'd perfected over the years. "It's just a misunderstanding," Gareth said, his voice shaky but rehearsed. "We're family. This isn't what it looks like." The officer didn't flinch. "Ma'am, is this your residence?" I nodded once. "Yes, I live here, alone. They changed the locks." Corinne let out a soft sob. "We were just trying to help her," she whispered. "She's been under so much stress lately. Ever since the divorce." She paused for effect, glancing toward the growing crowd. "We thought maybe she needed a fresh start." And just like that, I saw them. Neighbors stepping onto their porches, arms folded, murmuring like crows. To them, I wasn't a woman reclaiming her home. I was a daughter calling the cops on her aging mother. No one saw the lock, no one saw the packed truck. All they saw was a scene. "She's not well," Corinne continued, barely above a whisper, just loud enough for the closest couple across the street to hear. I stayed quiet, not because I didn't have words, but because I knew if I spoke, I might scream. And screaming would give them what they wanted, a spectacle. The officer handed me a clipboard. "If you want to press charges, now's the time. We've documented the forced entry and the lock replacement." I looked at the page. The pen felt heavier than it should have. My fingers hovered. "Not yet," I whispered. He nodded, respectful, like he understood more than he was allowed to say. "Let us know if that changes." By the time the sirens faded and the police left, Gareth was sitting on the edge of the curb with his head in his hands. My mother had retreated into the passenger seat of her Lexus, adjusting her lipstick in the mirror like she hadn't just violated my home. I went inside and locked the door behind me. The next morning was too quiet. The kind of quiet that wasn't peace, it was avoidance. The birds still chirped, the mail still came, but something in the air had shifted. My phone buzzed at 7:43 a.m. Aunt Judith, your mom told the group you had a breakdown. Everyone's praying for your peace. Mrs. Talbot from church. Maris, if you need help, we're here for you. We love your mom dearly. This can't be easy for her. I stared at the screen like it belonged to someone else. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but I couldn't bring myself to type. Instead, I grabbed my keys and drove to the corner diner. I needed coffee. I needed normalcy. I needed something, anything, that didn't reek of sympathy wrapped in judgment. As I slid into the booth, the same one I used to sit in with my ex on lazy Sundays, I heard it. She just came unglued, poor thing. Called the cops on her own mother, a woman whispered behind me. The mom's always been a saint. You know how hard that generation worked for their families? Her friend replied. I didn't turn around. I just sipped my coffee and pulled out a 5. I placed it on the table with exact change, then stood up and turned just enough for them to see my face. You might want to fact-check your prayers, I said. Their mouths opened, but nothing came out. I left before they could. Later that afternoon, against every instinct I had, I drove to my mother's place. Not to apologize, just to understand why. She was in the garden, snipping roses like a woman with no guilt and too much free time. You embarrassed me, she said, without looking up. In front of everyone. You called the police on your own family, Maris. I folded my arms. You broke into my house. I was saving it, she replied simply, before you ruined it with loneliness. My breath caught, not in pain, in clarity. This wasn't concern. This wasn't confusion. This was control, dressed in pearls and lavender perfume. You don't get to rewrite this, I said quietly. She finally turned to face me, eyes calm. Your brother's name is still on the deed, you know? Legally, it's not just your house. I stared at her, not with rage, not even sadness, just recognition. I left before I could say something I'd regret, or something I wouldn't. The days that followed were gray. Clients canceled politely but consistently. Appointments rescheduled indefinitely. I stopped showing up to the design studio, not because I was hiding, but because I was tired of pretending. The whispers hadn't stopped. They'd just gone digital. Texts came in waves, some from people pretending to check in, some from those too cowardly to say what they really thought. Some just stayed silent, but silence can be loud too. I started saving everything, emails, voicemails, bank statements, not out of spite, but survival. I wasn't going to be erased again, not quietly, not legally. Then, on Friday, it came. A manila envelope on my porch, no return address. Inside, a formal notice of property claim dispute. Gareth's signature, right there beside my mother's. I stared at it for a long time, not moving, not blinking, just reading the same sentence again and again until the words lost meaning. They've already started moving me out, I whispered. On paper this time. I folded the letter once, then again, until the paper felt stiff and small in my hand. My thumb pressed into the crease like it could erase the words. It couldn't. The kitchen was still dim from the early morning haze. I hadn't turned on the lights yet. Something about the gray quiet made it easier to think. Or maybe it just made it easier not to feel. There it was, my name, printed in bold, followed by lines and lines of legalese I couldn't fully understand without reading twice. It was almost comical. They even used my printer paper, I muttered, reaching for my coffee. Steam curled from the mug, but I barely tasted it. My stomach felt tight. My hands were cold. There were at least 12 pages, all with the same message dressed in different language. You don't own what you thought you did. I called Darren, my lawyer. He didn't sound surprised. They're claiming Gareth's name entitles him to half, since he was co-signer on the land title 20 years ago. But he never paid a cent on this house, I said. I know, but we're going to need documentation. Anything from your father that shows intent to transfer ownership solely to you. I stared across the room. The kitchen window still had those old wooden blinds Dad installed himself. One always stuck when you pulled it. He used to joke it gave the house character. Now it just felt like a metaphor. They want the house my father built with his own hands, I said quietly. Darren paused. If we can prove that it was gifted exclusively to you. I'll find something, I said. And I did. Not that morning, but by early afternoon, I was covered in dust in the attic, elbow deep in boxes I hadn't opened in a decade. The light bulb flickered overhead like it was tired of this too. I moved old photo albums, tax files, his cigar box full of random screws and nails. Then I saw it, tucked between two outdated blueprints, my childhood linen napkin. It was folded like a leaf, green, frayed at the edges, stitched with my clumsy 8-year-old hands. I held it like it might fall apart if I breathed too hard. Mom had called it useless, but Dad had kept it anyway. I ran my thumb along the seam. My fingers knew its texture like muscle memory. It wasn't just fabric, it was proof that someone had once believed in the small things I made. Behind the box, I found a yellow envelope. Dusty, soft at the edges. Written in Dad's handwriting, for Maris. Protect it when I'm gone. My breath caught. I sat down on the attic floor. My knees popped like firecrackers, but I didn't care. Inside was a single sheet, an original notarized deed, sole ownership, my name, his signature. The date was 4 months before he passed. I held it like it might vanish, like somehow it was too good, too right to be real. Later that afternoon, I drove straight to Darren's office. He blinked when I handed it to him. "You had this all along?" he asked. "No," I said. "I just looked where no one else ever does." He gave a short laugh, but didn't push further. "This changes everything." I nodded, but my chest felt heavy. I wasn't ready to fight, not yet. A piece of me still wanted to believe that this was a mistake, that once they saw how far this had gone, they'd stop. That night, my phone lit up. 2 voicemails. First, Mom. "You're not winning anything, Maris. You're tearing this family apart. I told you not to come back until you were ready to behave like a daughter." Then Gareth. "You should have just stayed away." The words hung in the air like smoke, thick, ugly, familiar. I stared at the screen, then I smiled. I've stayed away long enough. The next day moved like a slow river. I spent most of it sorting through old boxes, photographs, notes, receipts. I labeled manila folders, proof, ownership, communications, historical records. I didn't feel like a warrior. I felt like someone finally cleaning up after a flood. "I used to think silence was peace," I said out loud to no one, just the walls. But peace isn't when no one's fighting. It's when the right person finally does. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam drawers. I just did the work. Quietly. Methodically. That evening, just before sunset, I stopped by Darren's office again to drop off the new documents. The parking lot was mostly empty, just a golden haze spilling across the asphalt from the west. I locked up behind me, adjusting my bag on my shoulder. Then I saw him, Gareth. He was leaning against the side of my car, pale as a ghost and sweating through his collar. I didn't stop walking. "Mom's changing the locks again," he said as I neared. She says you're dangerous now. I opened the door and looked him in the eye. He wouldn't meet mine. Then tell her, I said, steady and calm. That danger finally learned how to use her own key. By the time I pulled into my driveway the next morning, the cold November sun had already climbed over the rooftops, casting sharp white light on the frost that clung to the grass. My fingers, stiff from the steering wheel, fumbled for the key as I approached the front door. I slid it into the lock. It caught, tried again, turned gently. Nothing. It didn't turn. My father's key, heavy brass, smooth from years in his hand, now useless in mine. I stared at the doorknob for a long moment, jaw clenched, heart quiet. It didn't matter that I held a notarized deed with my name on it. They'd always believed I didn't belong. And now they'd made it real, physical. I sat down on the porch steps, the concrete still holding the night's chill. Across the street, a neighbor peeked through her curtains, then quickly pulled them shut when I looked up. People always seem to fear the woman who refuses to shrink. I didn't call the police this time. I called a locksmith. He arrived 20 minutes later, a young guy with a scruffy beard and nervous smile. He glanced at the house, then at me. "Locked out?" he asked, half apologetic. I stood. "It's my house. I'm done asking permission to enter my own life." He nodded, said nothing else, and got to work. 15 minutes later, the lock clicked open, and he handed me a fresh set of keys. I didn't thank him out loud, just handed over the check and stepped inside like I hadn't been shut out of my own history just hours before. The house smelled faintly of lavender and dust. It was quiet, but not peaceful. I left the new keys on the entry table and moved to the kitchen. That's when my phone buzzed. Nora. She'd sent a link. Charity auction for community legacy homes, hosted by Corinne Ellery. I frowned and opened it. The banner photo hit me like a punch. My house, my front porch, my living room, even the oak tree my dad planted when I was born. All in a soft, golden filter like a magazine spread. The caption read, "A property generously transitioned by the Ellery family to fund future generations." I stared at the screen. The words swam. My throat tightened. She wasn't just trying to take it. She was dressing it up as virtue, selling off my life as if it were an unwanted heirloom, a charitable act for the cameras, a performance. I set the phone down gently, hands trembling. Not from fear, but from fury so sharp it buzzed under my skin. That afternoon, I pulled the navy wool coat from the back of my closet, the one I wore to my father's funeral. Not out of nostalgia, out of armor. I arrived at the event quietly. No one expected me. The room smelled like catered finger food and expensive perfume. People clinked glasses and murmured praise as they studied a projector screen scrolling images of Ellery family contributions. Corinne stood center stage, microphone in hand, eyes aglow under the lights. She was in her element. "Sometimes," she said, voice syrupy, "you must release what you love so others can benefit." She gestured toward the photo of my home. The applause followed like obedient rain. I stood at the back, didn't say a word, didn't need to. When her eyes landed on me, the corner of her smile twitched, but she didn't falter. She was too practiced, too polished. I let her finish lying. It was practically a family tradition. Once she stepped off stage, I walked past her, straight to the auction coordinator near the podium. He looked up, puzzled. I handed him an envelope. "You'll want to read that before you take bids," I said calmly. "It's about ownership, legal ownership." His brows drew together. "Are you?" "I'm the person whose name is on the deed." He didn't stop me as I turned and walked away. Corinne called after me, soft, measured, just loud enough for nearby ears. "Maris, don't make a scene." I didn't even look back. "You already did." By dusk, I was home again. The new key slid into the new lock with a soft click. I exhaled. The house still felt empty. But this time it wasn't hollow. It was quiet the way a storm breaks, just before everything starts growing again. I dropped my coat onto the chair, toed off my shoes, and sank to the kitchen floor. The tile was cool beneath me. I leaned back against the cabinets and let the silence hold me. "Dad," I whispered. I did it without shouting. On the table nearby, the folded napkin still sat. The one I made as a child, the one he never threw away. Proof that some things, small things, are still worth keeping. My phone buzzed again. Gareth. The message was short. "Mom's furious. She's not done." Attached was a photo. My lawyer's office. The glass door shattered. Not a note. No words. Just broken entry. I stared at it. "She didn't come after my house this time," I said aloud. "She came after my proof." I grabbed my coat and keys without thinking. The house was still and dim. The kind of quiet that sits heavy on your chest. I didn't even bother locking the door behind me. 15 minutes later, I pulled into the small parking lot outside Hawkins & Lowe, the law office tucked behind a row of magnolia trees off College Avenue. Even from the street, I could see the front glass, shattered clean through. Shards glittered on the concrete like frost. Inside, Mr. Hawkins was bent over with a broom and dustpan, tie loosened, sleeves rolled. He looked up when I walked in. "They didn't even try to be subtle," he muttered. Papers were everywhere, folders cracked open, file drawers yanked halfway out, one of the office chairs knocked over like someone had stumbled against it. "They took the deed copy," he added, straightening. "Just that." I didn't flinch. I stepped over a tangle of paperwork and knelt down, picking up one of the scattered pages. A maintenance bill. My name in bold, my signature at the bottom. "She didn't just break a door," I said. "She broke the illusion that this was still about family." Hawkins rubbed the back of his neck. "We'll file a report, but honestly, I doubt the sheriff's office will take this seriously." I looked him in the eye. "They can steal paper. They can't steal signatures." He nodded, quietly. No more words between us. There weren't any left that mattered. 2 days later, the mail came early. The envelope was thick. Too thick. I knew before I opened it. Inside, a formal court summons. Corinne Ellery and Gareth Ellery v. Maris Ellery. The claim? Fraudulent property possession. I sat on the edge of my bed, the document spread across my lap. My fingers brushed the raised court seal, like maybe if I touched it long enough, it would make sense. It didn't. I read it again and again. "They're saying I faked owning my father's house," I whispered to no one. My lawyer called 30 minutes after the delivery. He'd already seen the filing. "They're going after public perception," he said. "It's not about winning. It's about drowning you in mud until you stop fighting. They don't even believe it themselves. They don't have to." He paused, his voice lower. "We could settle, quietly. No press, no more hearings." I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "Silence is what built this mess. I'm not rebuilding it." The hearing was scheduled for Thursday, 9:30 a.m., in the Santa Rosa County Courthouse. I arrived early. My folder was tucked under my arm, carefully prepared, neatly ordered, everything my mother always said I wasn't. I wore gray, no jewelry, no makeup, just a calm, unsmiling face. Corinne showed up 20 minutes late, wrapped in soft blue wool and pearl earrings. Her lipstick was perfect. Her voice even more so. She smiled at the bailiff. Gareth stayed 2 steps behind her. Couldn't meet my eyes. When we were called, the courtroom felt smaller than I remembered. The wood-paneled walls seemed to lean in, the silence pressing down on every breath. Her lawyer opened with ease, friendly tone, concerned eyes. "Our client simply acted in good faith," he said, preserving the home after years of documented neglect by her daughter. I didn't blink. She feared for the property's condition, for the family's legacy. What mother wouldn't take initiative in a time of uncertainty? I let him finish. Then I stood. I wasn't neglecting it, I said, voice steady. I was paying for it, every bill, every roof repair, every termite inspection. I held up a stack of invoices, slowly walked them to the bench. I turned to the room, not the judge. You just never asked who signed the checks. Then, I pulled the final document from my folder. The original deed, notarized, signed, dated. My name. My father's handwriting in the corner. For Maris. I laid it down. The room didn't gasp. No drama. Just silence. Thick and undeniable. Afterward, outside the courtroom, Corinne caught me alone by the vending machines. "This isn't over," she hissed. I didn't back up. "It never was, Mom. You just finally met someone who doesn't play by your rules." I walked away, my hand in my coat pocket, fingers wrapped around my house key. It didn't feel like metal anymore. It felt like resolve. That evening, the sun was gone by the time I turned onto my street. The porch light flickered, as if remembering it belonged to me again. I picked up the mail before going inside. Bills, all of them in my name. For water I didn't use, electricity I didn't tap, services I never signed up for. At the bottom of the pile sat a thick manila envelope. Stamped in red, notice of eviction. I didn't move. I just stood in my hallway, one hand still on the doorknob, reading the words twice. "They lost in court," I whispered, "so they switched to paperwork. Different weapons. Same war." I sat in my car outside City Hall the next morning, the eviction notice still crumpled in the passenger seat, creased where my grip had tightened overnight. My father's original deed sat beside it, pristine and worn all at once. The last thing I trusted more than memory. The lobby smelled like old carpet and bureaucracy. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I stepped to the front counter. A young man with sleepy eyes looked up from his computer. "I need to check the property file for 32 Weller Street," I said, sliding the papers across the counter. He tapped at his keyboard, his brows pinched slightly. Then, after a moment, he glanced up. "There's been a recent update," he said. My mouth went dry. "What kind of update?" "Ownership transfer. Pending." I blinked. "Transfer to who?" He hesitated. "Corinne Ellery and Gareth Ellery." It landed in my chest like ice water. I stepped back slightly, keeping my voice level. "There must be a mistake. That house is under my name. I have the deed, the notarized original." He looked uncomfortable. "I'm just reading the system, ma'am. You can request the documentation through the archive clerk if you want to see the transfer request." "Yeah," I said, swallowing hard. "Yeah, I want to see it." He handed me a request form and pointed toward a bench near the hallway. I sat and filled it out with stiff fingers, the pen scraping harder with each line. After turning it in, I waited. Nearly an hour passed. The sun had shifted across the lobby floor. I didn't move. Finally, a woman in a navy cardigan approached with a thin manila folder. She didn't say a word, just handed it to me and walked away. Inside were 2 stapled packets. The top page showed the same property address, the same parcel ID. A scanned signature at the bottom caught my eye. Mine. Except it wasn't. The curve of the M was too rounded, the slant too perfect. My actual signature had a slight hitch in the S, the result of a childhood wrist injury. This one didn't. And the date? October 9th. I was in Vancouver that entire week, presenting a design proposal. I had boarding passes, emails. I wasn't even in the state. "They signed me out of my own life," I murmured. Instead of tearing the paper, screaming, or rushing back to the clerk, I did something else. I reached for my phone. I photographed every single page, slowly and methodically, even the cover letter. Then I took a breath, held it, and photographed the breath leaving me. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was survival. I walked out of City Hall with the calm of someone who'd been burned too many times to flinch. The sky outside had turned silver gray. I called Nora and asked if she had time for coffee. We met at a little place near downtown, half empty that afternoon. I slid into the booth across from her and placed the folder on the table. "What is it?" she asked. "They forged my name," I said simply. Her eyes widened. "What?" I pushed the paperwork toward her. She scanned the top page, then snapped her gaze to me. "Maris, this is criminal." "So was breaking into my house," I said, wrapping my hands around my coffee mug. "They're not just coming for the house, they're rewriting who I am." Nora leaned in. "You have to go to the police, or the news." I shook my head. Not yet. They built their power on the belief I'd never fight back. I want them to see what it looks like when I do. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, uploading every scanned page to cloud storage. One copy went to Mr. Hawkins, another to my bank's fraud division, a third to a private investigator I'd quietly hired weeks ago. Each upload felt like a layer of armor I didn't know I needed. The folded linen napkin, the one I made when I was 8, sat beside my laptop. It had no legal weight, no value in court, but it reminded me who I'd always been beneath their lies. Someone who created things, even when no one thought it mattered. The house creaked gently as I leaned back. For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. Near midnight, my phone rang. The screen flashed Mom. I let it ring twice before answering. Her voice was clipped, colder than usual. "You really think you can win against us?" I didn't reply. "Family doesn't sue family." My voice was even. "You stopped being family when you started breaking locks." There was a pause, then her tone sharpened. "You'll regret this." I looked out at the dark window, my reflection staring back. "I already did," I said softly. "For 35 years. I'm done regretting." I ended the call. The next morning, I didn't hesitate. I dressed, made coffee, and drafted the first few paragraphs of a formal fraud claim. The kind that comes with evidence, timelines, and no more grace. They'd tried to bury me under paperwork. I was going to climb out of it. They wanted me erased, I thought. But I'm not writing my name this time, I'm carving it. I spent the rest of the day scanning, sorting, highlighting. By dusk, the folder on my desktop was titled Restoration. As I flipped through the final document, one last scan to ensure everything was there, my finger froze. It was a signature I knew well, my father's, slanted, firm, familiar. Except the date was months after he died. I stared, motionless. My breath caught in my throat. "They didn't just steal from me," I whispered. "They desecrated him." The words stayed with me through the night, heavy as stones. I didn't sleep. I watched the shadows crawl across the ceiling until the first hint of dawn broke through the blinds. The air felt colder than usual, the kind that makes your hands ache even before you touch anything. By 7, I was in the car, driving toward the county courthouse. The deed folder sat in the passenger seat, my father's notary records tucked inside, the last physical trace of his handwriting I could trust. The morning sun was bright but weak, filtered through fog, painting the world in pale gray. I parked and walked through the courthouse doors, the familiar hum of fluorescent lights above me again. The clerk at the records desk, a woman about my age, kind eyes, voice tired from too many mornings, looked up. "I need a handwriting verification," I said, setting the folder down. "This concerns a property transfer." She opened the file and frowned. "You have both copies?" "Yes, the original and the one filed 2 weeks ago." She nodded and began typing. After a few minutes, the printer whirred and spat out 2 comparison sheets. She laid them side by side. Even from across the counter, I could see it. The forged one was clean, precise, almost elegant. But my father's real signature had a small loop at the end of the E in Ellery, a quirk he never corrected, even when he tried to teach me to write neatly. I traced it gently with my finger. "They tried to mimic him," I murmured, "but you can't fake love." The clerk's face softened. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. She printed a notarized comparison sheet for me and whispered, "Good luck." By the time I walked into the courtroom that afternoon, I wasn't tired anymore. I was focused. The room was cold, not from temperature, but from tension. My mother sat to the right, wearing a cream blazer and her usual pearls. She looked like she'd dressed for a photo shoot, not a hearing. Gareth sat beside her, pale, shifting in his chair, eyes downcast. I took my seat at the opposite table, spreading out my evidence with deliberate calm. The digital timestamps, the notarized verification, and my ace, a printout from City Hall's server log showing the forged document uploaded from Corinne's IP address. When the hearing began, her lawyer spoke first, polished and patronizing. "Our client maintains that all actions were taken in the family's best interest," he said smoothly. Mrs. Ellery merely continued her late husband's legacy. I waited until he finished, then stood. "My father's legacy was honesty," I said quietly. "That's something my mother didn't inherit." The lawyer frowned. "Ms. Ellery?" I lifted the document comparison and held it up for the judge. "This is my father's real signature, and this," I said, placing the forged one beside it, "was signed 6 months after his death." A ripple of murmurs filled the courtroom. The judge leaned forward. My mother's jaw tightened. "You had no right digging into that," she hissed across the aisle. "I had every right," I replied. "You signed my name, then his. You stole from both of us." Her composure cracked like thin glass. She leaned forward, voice trembling. "I did it for the family. He would have wanted this." "No," I said, locking eyes with her. "He would have wanted the truth." For a moment, no one moved. The silence felt sacred, like a church before confession. Then Gareth stood. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Mom, stop!" Everyone turned. His voice shook, but it was clear. "She's right. You made me sign too. You said it was just transfer paperwork, that it didn't mean anything." "Sit down, Gareth," Corinne snapped. He didn't. His face was flushed, his hands trembling. "You said Dad changed his will, but I never saw it. I just trusted you." The judge raised a hand for silence, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. I stared at my brother, not angry, just tired. I expected war, I thought. I didn't expect surrender. The judge called for a recess. My mother sank into her chair, muttering, "Ungrateful child," over and over like a prayer gone sour. Outside, in the hallway, the air felt cleaner. Gareth caught up to me before I reached the elevator. His eyes were red. "I didn't know, Mari, I swear." I looked at him. "You didn't want to know," I said softly. "But maybe now you will." He nodded, staring at the floor. We didn't hug. We didn't need to. Some truths don't need arms to be felt. When I stepped outside, the sun had started to set, orange bleeding into lavender. I took the old folder from my bag and opened it one more time. My father's real signature gleamed faintly under the light, that imperfect loop at the end of his name curling upward like a quiet smile. He was gone, but he'd written something they couldn't erase, the proof that truth endures longer than deceit. That night, back home, the house was silent except for the ticking of the kitchen clock. I made tea, sat at the table, and let the exhaustion finally reach me. The phone buzzed just as I was about to close my laptop. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Ms. Ellery," a male voice said, low and even. "This is Detective Rhodes with Santa Rosa PD. We've uncovered something you need to see. It's about your father's estate." My hand froze halfway to the mug. "What about it?" I asked. "I can't discuss details over the phone, but it changes things. I suggest you come by first thing tomorrow." The line went quiet. I sat there long after the call ended, staring at the empty space where the napkin used to be. I'd moved it to my desk earlier that morning, like I knew something was coming. "I thought I'd buried all his secrets," I whispered. "But some ghosts don't stay quiet when you finally speak." I slept restlessly, turning from side to side, my father's voice still echoing in my head. Not his real voice, but the one I imagined as I read his letter. "Speak when they expect you to bow." I didn't know if I'd slept at all until the phone buzzed again just after sunrise, and I was already sitting up, fully clothed, waiting. By 9, I was standing inside Detective Rhodes's office. The place looked less like a police department and more like a paper graveyard. Boxes piled high, corkboards sagging under years of taped evidence and scribbled notes. He waved me in with the kind of nod that carried weight. "Ms. Ellery," he said as he motioned for me to sit. "We found something we think your father intended for you to have." He slid a thin envelope across the desk, yellowed with age but well-preserved. Inside was a document from Valley First Bank. My father had maintained a private safety deposit box for over 20 years, never accessed, never updated. The curious part? Access had been granted to 2 people, Corinne Ellery and me. My fingers tightened around the edge of the form. "So, she knew this was there?" He nodded. "We have no record of her ever trying to open it, but she had authority." I took a slow breath. "She shared every part of his life, except his conscience." Rhodes folded his hands. "You ready to open it?" I was, and I wasn't. But I nodded anyway. We drove over together. The bank manager recognized the name Ellery immediately, not with fondness, more like unease. A vault attendant brought out the long metal box with the quiet reverence of someone delivering something sacred. Inside, resting neatly against the velvet lining, was a single sealed envelope. To be opened only by Maris Ellery upon my passing. I knew that handwriting better than my own. I didn't open it there. I waited until I was back in the car. With the engine running and heat slowly filling the air, I tore the seal. If you're reading this, it means the truth has found its way home. I left the house in your name because you cared for it when no one else did. Corinne and Gareth will try to undo that, not because they need it, but because they cannot stand what they do not control. Remember, my daughter, silence is not peace. Speak when they expect you to bow. I didn't cry in front of Rhodes. I didn't speak for several minutes. I just held the letter, pressing it to my chest like a child clutches a blanket during a storm. He saw them coming before I even knew what to fear. And even in death, he had prepared the one thing I never expected: permission to fight. Later that evening, just as I was folding the letter into a clean plastic sleeve, there was a knock at the door. I didn't need to look through the peephole. I knew her knock. Too polite, too rehearsed. Corinne stood on the porch, wearing her favorite gray coat, the one she always wore to church and courtrooms alike. Her face was thinner than usual, but her pride hadn't aged a day. "So," she said, eyeing the envelope in my hand, "he wrote you one of his letters." I didn't answer. "You always were his favorite," she said flatly. "No," I replied, voice low but steady. "I was just the only one who listened." She stepped closer, her heels clicking softly on the wood. "You've humiliated this family. Do you really think people are going to see you as some poor, wounded daughter? I don't need them to, I said. I just need you to stop pretending this was love. She blinked. For the first time in years, she looked unsure. The mask faltered, but only for a moment. She turned without another word and walked away. I stood there long after the porch light flickered on, wondering what she'd come for. Validation, maybe. A crack in my resolve. But she left with nothing. The house was warm when I walked back in. For once, I didn't feel the urge to double lock the door. My phone buzzed again around 10 p.m. My lawyer's name lit up the screen. The judge signed off. The house is legally yours, and they've opened an investigation into your mother for document fraud. I stared at my father's picture on the bookshelf. I didn't cry this time. I just sat down at his old desk, laid the letter beside his photo, and whispered, "It's over, Dad. I kept the house. But more than that, I kept your truth." The silver key, the one that once barely turned, now sat next to the letter. It gleamed in the soft lamplight, no longer just a tool, but a symbol of legacy, of survival. I walked into the kitchen and glanced at the folded napkin still resting by the fruit bowl. I hadn't moved it since the first night, but it looked different now, not like a memory, like a promise, untouched peace. I sat on the edge of the counter, letting the silence of the house settle around me like a wool blanket. I wasn't angry anymore, not bitter, just still. Family doesn't always mean safety. Sometimes it's the storm you survive. But when you walk out of it and still choose to build a home, that's when you've won. Around midnight, I turned off the lights. The air outside bit at my cheeks as I stepped onto the porch. I didn't look back. The house, every inch of it, was finally mine. Not because of the court, but because I'd earned it, inch by inch, truth by painful truth. As I reached for the doorknob to head back inside, my foot caught on something beneath the mat. A small white envelope. No stamp, just handwriting I knew too well. I opened it slowly. One line, "You may own the house, but you'll never understand why I did it." I let the paper fall to my side. I didn't need her reasons anymore. "Maybe not," I whispered, "but for once, I don't need her reasons to feel whole." The letter sat on the kitchen table all night. I couldn't bring myself to open it right away. I left it untouched, next to the napkin and the coffee mug I hadn't moved in days. It looked harmless, small, unassuming, but I knew better. After everything, this would be the last cut if I let it be. Morning came quiet and cold. I pulled a sweater over my shoulders and sat by the window with the envelope in my lap. My fingers hesitated at the seal. After all the lies, I thought, I wasn't sure I could handle one more truth. But sometimes, even a confession comes too late to hurt you. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single folded sheet and a worn photo. I held the photo first. My mother, young and smiling, standing in front of the house with a baby in her arms. Me. Her arm around me was soft, protective. It didn't match the woman I'd stood across from in court. Then I read the letter. "Maris, you were never meant to know. Your father's company was collapsing when he died. The house was tied to debts you couldn't see. I forged your name to keep it from being seized. But once I did, I couldn't undo it without losing everything. You reminded me too much of him. Strong, kind, and stubborn. Every time I looked at you, I saw the choices I never made. I didn't take the house from you. I took it from the version of me that never had the courage to leave. Mom." I stared at the page for a long time. She didn't steal the house for greed. She stole it out of fear, of losing the only thing that tethered her to stability. She was trapped by regret and legacy and her own image of survival. And maybe, in some twisted way, that letter was her apology. Late that morning, after refolding the page carefully, I got in the car and drove to the cemetery. The sky was cloudless, the air thin and dry, the kind that made your breath look bigger than it felt. I stood by my father's grave for a while before saying anything. Then I knelt, pulled the letter from my coat pocket, and placed it gently on the grass. I slid the folded napkin beside it, the same one that had followed me from courtrooms to cafes, from heartbreak to hope. "You were both right in your own broken ways," I whispered, "but I'm done carrying the weight of what you couldn't fix." A breeze rolled through the cemetery, soft but certain. The edge of the napkin lifted, fluttered once, then settled again. That's when I felt it. Not peace exactly, but release. Like something that had been holding me in place had let go. I didn't stay long. Grief wasn't asking me to. Back home, I walked through every room. My father's study was still dusted with old books and tools he hadn't used in his last years. The kitchen still held the scent of cinnamon and coffee. The hallway, lined with faded photographs, didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt honest. "This house isn't just mine by law," I said aloud. "It's mine because I stayed when it broke, cleaned when it rotted, and fought when it was taken. Every nail, every memory, every scar, I earned it." I pulled open every curtain. Light poured in, bright and sharp, casting new shadows on old walls. Scout, my old retriever, curled up beside my feet as I sat down on the couch, the letter still in my hand. "Home isn't where you come from," I murmured. "It's where you decide to stop running." The quiet that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Full of everything I'd survived, everything I'd reclaimed. A week later, I got an email from the county clerk. Subject line, "Final notice, property reinstatement confirmed." I stared at it for a moment, then hit delete. I didn't need the proof anymore. They tried to erase me from my own story. But I came back, not just home, but to myself. And this time, no one's holding the pen but me. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, I stood out on the front porch, mug in hand. A delivery truck rolled by, same make, same dull white paint as the one that used to bring legal threats and final warnings. For a split second, my shoulders tensed out of habit. Then I laughed, softly, shaking my head. Funny how the things that used to break you start to look small once you've rebuilt yourself. "So,"